The afternoon sun hung low in the western sky on April 12, 2003, casting amber light across the quiet residential streets of Brookfield, Ohio. Spring had arrived with gentle insistence. Dogwood trees bloomed white and pink along Maple Drive, their petals drifting lazily onto manicured lawns, still damp from morning sprinklers. The air carried that particular sweetness of early spring, fresh-cut grass mingling with honeysuckle climbing wooden fences, punctuated by the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower and the rhythmic thunk of a basketball against pavement. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, that suspended hour between lunch and dinner when suburban neighborhoods hold their breath in peaceful stillness, and the world feels safe, predictable, and impossibly ordinary. Inside the Carter family's two-story colonial on Maple Drive, 9-year-old Emily Carter stood in the kitchen doorway, her small frame practically vibrating with anticipation. She wore her favorite purple jacket, slightly too warm for the 68-degree afternoon, but she never went anywhere without it. Her grandmother had sewn a monarch butterfly patch onto the left sleeve last summer, and Emily traced her finger over its orange and black wings absently while she waited for her mother's permission. Her blonde hair, the color of summer wheat, was pulled back in a high ponytail secured with a purple scrunchie. A dusting of freckles crossed her small nose, and her green eyes, her father's eyes, sparkled with the impatient energy of a child who had already been inside too long on a beautiful Saturday. Sarah Carter stood at the kitchen sink, her hands submerged in warm, soapy water, mechanically washing lunch dishes while half listening to Emily's rapid-fire chatter about the book she'd finished that morning. It was some adventure story about pirates and buried treasure, the kind of tale that captured Emily's vivid imagination and fueled the elaborate games she played with her friends. Sarah smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm, noting how Emily's voice rose and fell with the drama of the story, her hands gesturing wildly to emphasize the exciting parts. Emily's world was small and precisely mapped in her mind. She knew every crack in the sidewalk between home and Lincoln Park. The one in front of the Hendersons' house looked like a lightning bolt. The one by the Johnsons' mailbox resembled a smile. She could identify her neighbor's dogs by their barks. The miller's golden retriever had a deep, friendly woof. Mrs. Chen's poodle yapped in sharp bursts. Mr. Henderson's old beagle had a mournful howl that echoed through the neighborhood at dusk. At Brookfield Elementary, where Emily was in 4th grade, teachers described her as imaginative, kind, and occasionally too talkative during silent reading time. She excelled in art class, where her drawings of fantastical creatures and elaborate castles earned prominent display on the classroom bulletin board. She had a collection of smooth river stones hidden in a shoebox under her bed, each one carefully labeled with masking tape, noting where she'd found it and the date. Her best friends were Jessica Martinez and Mia Thompson, both waiting at Lincoln Park since 1 o'clock that afternoon. They had plans to practice on the monkey bars. Jessica could make it all the way across without stopping, and Emily was determined to match that feat today. At 2:47 p.m., Sarah glanced at the kitchen clock and nodded permission. Emily's face lit up with joy so pure and uncomplicated that Sarah would replay that moment in her mind thousands of times over the coming years. Emily grabbed her small purple backpack, kissed her mother's cheek, and bounded toward the front door. "Be home by 5:30 for dinner," Sarah called. "We're having spaghetti." Sarah moved to the living room window, watching her daughter skip down the driveway, purple jacket bright against the green landscape. Emily paused at the sidewalk, looked both ways as she'd been taught, then turned left toward Elm Street. The purple jacket flashed between houses until it disappeared around the Johnsons' tall hedge. That was the last time Sarah Carter saw her daughter alive. The kitchen clock ticked forward. Sarah dried the lunch dishes and put them away, humming absently. She started preparing dinner, chopping onions and garlic for spaghetti sauce, browning ground beef in her favorite cast-iron skillet. The house filled with warm, savory aroma. At 5:15 p.m., she set the table, placing Emily's favorite purple plate at her usual spot. At 5:30, she called upstairs to her husband David. At 5:35, she walked to the front porch and looked down the street toward the park, expecting to see that purple jacket bobbing into view. By 5:45 p.m., concern had begun its insidious crawl up Sarah's spine. She called Jessica's mother, who answered on the third ring. Yes, Emily had been at the park. Yes, the girls had played together, swings first, then the slide, then the monkey bars where Emily had matched Jessica's achievement. But Emily had left around 3:45 p.m., saying she wanted to go home. Jessica had watched her friend walk away, purple jacket disappearing down Park Avenue. That 4-block walk should have taken 10 minutes, 15 at most. Sarah felt her heart rate accelerate, her mouth going dry. David came downstairs, took one look at his wife's face, and grabbed his car keys without being asked. He drove slowly through neighborhood streets, windows down, calling Emily's name loud enough to echo off houses. Sarah walked the route on foot, stopping every few yards to peer into backyard bushes, to check the small wooded area behind the miller's house, to ask every person she passed if they'd seen a little girl in a purple jacket. At 6:15 p.m., with the sun sinking below the rooflines, they called the Brookfield Police Department. Within 40 minutes, Lincoln Park transformed from a place of childhood joy into a crime scene. Yellow police tape cordoned off the playground equipment, the swings still swaying slightly in the evening breeze. Detective James Crawford arrived at 6:50 p.m., a 20-year veteran whose weathered face and careful eyes had seen enough to know that the first hours of a missing child case were absolutely critical. He organized the initial search with military precision, dividing volunteers into teams, assigning each group a specific quadrant of the neighborhood to search systematically. By nightfall, Lincoln Park was flooded with flashlights, creating pools of illumination that swept through darkness like restless ghosts. The entire community mobilized with remarkable speed. Teachers who had taught Emily, shop owners who had sold her candy, off-duty firefighters, construction workers still in dusty jeans, elderly neighbors moving slowly but just as determined. They formed search lines that moved through surrounding woods, calling Emily's name in a chorus that grew more desperate as the hours passed. The temperature dropped to 45 degrees as midnight approached. Crime scene technicians documented every inch of the playground. They photographed the monkey bars where Emily had achieved her triumph just hours earlier, the wood chips beneath the swings still showing impressions where sneakers had dragged during play. They collected every piece of potential evidence: cigarette butts from the trash can, candy wrappers caught in bushes, a forgotten jump rope coiled beside the slide. Each item was catalogued, tagged, sealed in plastic evidence bags with hope that one might yield a clue. Sarah and David Carter stood at the edge of the search area, wrapped in blankets someone had draped over their shoulders, watching the flashlight beams dance through the darkness. Sarah had been crying for 5 hours straight, her face swollen and blotched, her voice hoarse from calling Emily's name until her throat was raw. She clutched Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit, a floppy-eared toy named Mr. Buttons, pressing it against her chest as if the familiar weight might somehow bring her daughter back. David moved among the volunteers like a ghost, distributing photographs. Emily's school picture from September, showing her gap-toothed smile, a snapshot from Christmas morning where she posed with the family's golden retriever wearing matching Santa hats. The first 48 hours passed in a nightmarish blur of police interviews, lie detector tests, and media conferences. Sarah and David sat in an interrogation room at the police station. They knew it was protocol, understood they had to be eliminated as suspects, but the cold metal chairs and one-way mirror made Sarah feel like a criminal rather than a terrified mother. The polygraph examiner attached sensors to their bodies, measuring heartbeats and perspiration while asking if they had harmed their daughter. Both passed without issue, though the experience left them feeling violated and desperate. On April 14th, Sarah and David appeared at their first press conference. Television cameras packed the community center, their bright lights harsh and invasive. Sarah wore the same clothes she'd had on when Emily disappeared. She couldn't bear to change. Her hands trembled visibly as she held a photograph of Emily. When she spoke, her voice broke after 3 words, and David had to take over, reading from a prepared statement. Emily is 9 years old. She's 4 feet 2 inches tall, weighs 63 pounds, and has blonde hair and green eyes. She was last seen wearing a purple jacket with a butterfly patch on the left sleeve. She loves to draw, wants to be a veterinarian, and still sleeps with her stuffed rabbit. Please, if anyone knows anything at all, please help us find our little girl and bring her home. The plea was broadcast on local news channels, picked up by national networks, shared across early internet forums. Within 24 hours, Emily Carter's face was everywhere. On April 15th, the FBI arrived from Cleveland. Special Agent Monica Reeves, a specialist in child abduction cases, set up a command center in the Brookfield Community Center's main hall. Wall-mounted maps were covered with colored pins, marking search areas and investigation sites. Timeline boards tracked Emily's last known movements minute by minute. A bank of phones was installed to handle tips from the public. The volunteer search expanded exponentially with cadaver dogs, helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras, and dive teams exploring every body of water within a 20-mile radius. Tips flooded in from across the country. A gas station attendant in Pennsylvania thought he'd seen a girl matching Emily's description getting into a blue sedan. A trucker reported seeing someone who looked like Emily at a rest stop in West Virginia. Each lead, no matter how improbable, sent investigators racing across state lines, only to discover cases of mistaken identity or deliberate hoaxes from attention seekers. Detective Crawford pursued every lead with equal vigor. He worked 18-hour days, sleeping in his office, surviving on vending machine coffee. His desk disappeared beneath case files, witness statements, forensic reports. The community of Brookfield transformed in those early weeks. Purple ribbons appeared overnight on every tree, lamppost and mailbox, thousands of them fluttering in the spring breeze. Local businesses printed 50,000 flyers featuring Emily's photograph. Prayer vigils were held every Wednesday evening at St. Michael's Church, where hundreds of candles flickered in the darkness. Children who had played with Emily now stayed close to their parents. Doors that had been left unlocked for generations were suddenly bolted. The investigation turned its methodical attention to known sex offenders in the region. Every registered individual within a 50-mile radius was interviewed, their alibis verified with forensic precision, their homes searched. The Carters' extended family and friends were interviewed repeatedly. Neighbors came under scrutiny. By summer, the investigation had generated over 3,000 tips, interviewed more than 500 people, and searched 42 locations. Yet despite this massive effort involving hundreds of law enforcement personnel, thousands of volunteers, and countless hours of investigation, not a single piece of concrete evidence was found. As months stretched into years, the inevitable progression of fading hope began. Media coverage dwindled. Emily's case moved from front-page news to occasional anniversary stories, then disappeared from newspapers altogether. Volunteers returned to their regular lives. The purple ribbons faded in the sun and rain, their vibrant color bleaching to pale lavender, then gray, before finally disappearing. The FBI packed up their command center. Detective Crawford officially retired in 2011, though he kept Emily's file in his home office, occasionally pulling it out to review witness statements, searching for the detail he might have missed. Sarah and David Carter aged decades during those years. Sarah's hair turned prematurely gray, white streaks appearing at her temples by age 35. She left Emily's bedroom exactly as it had been on April 12, 2003. The bed made with its purple comforter, stuffed animals on the pillows, drawings on the walls. Sarah sometimes went into that room and sat on the floor, holding Mr. Buttons and talking to the empty air, telling her absent daughter about her day. David threw himself into advocacy work, lobbying for improved Amber Alert systems and helping establish a foundation dedicated to supporting families of missing children. They appeared on anniversary news segments every April 12th, making renewed pleas for information. Their faces became familiar symbols of parental loss. The town of Brookfield carried the weight of Emily's absence like a collective scar. Lincoln Park became a place families avoided, the playground equipment rusting, weeds growing through wood chips. Emily Carter became a ghost haunting the collective memory, not a supernatural presence, but a psychological one. 20 years passed. Emily would have turned 29 in 2024. Instead, she remained frozen at 9 years old, forever in that purple jacket. On October 8, 2023, contractor Mike Sullivan was 3 weeks into a renovation project at 247 Oak Street in Brookfield, less than 3 blocks from Lincoln Park. The house had belonged to Robert Henley, a retired postal worker who had died in his sleep at age 71 on March 15th. Henley's estate was being settled by distant cousins from Cleveland who hired Sullivan to modernize it before listing it for sale. Sullivan was working in the basement when he noticed something unusual about the measurements. The interior dimensions of the south wall were approximately 6 feet shorter than the exterior measurements suggested they should be. On that grey October morning, with rain drumming steadily against basement windows, Sullivan decided to investigate the discrepancy. He assumed it was probably a structural oddity or water damage that previous owners had concealed. He positioned his sledgehammer against the drywall and swung hard. The hammerhead punched through with a hollow sound that immediately told him there was empty space behind. 3 more strategic hits, and a section of drywall collapsed inward, revealing darkness beyond. Sullivan grabbed his flashlight and aimed the beam into the opening. The air that escaped was stale and wrong, not just musty like an old basement, but something else that made his instincts scream danger. The flashlight beam revealed a small room, approximately 6 feet by 8 feet, with a ceiling low enough that an adult would have to crouch. The walls were unpainted concrete. The floor was bare cement, stained dark in patterns Sullivan tried not to think about too carefully. Against one wall was a child's mattress, its fabric deteriorated into mold and decay. Scattered across the floor were items that made Sullivan's throat close and his hands start shaking. Clothing sized for a child, several books with water-damaged covers, crayons broken and scattered, and dozens of drawings, some pinned to walls with rusted thumbtacks, others lying loose on the floor. Sullivan stepped closer, his flashlight beam trembling. The drawings showed a house, a simple child's rendering with windows and a door. Stick figures were labeled in careful handwriting: Mom, Dad, me. Other drawings showed a park with swings. Later drawings, darker and more desperate, depicted a small figure alone in a tiny room, stick figure tears drawn on the face, words like help and please written in increasingly shaky letters. In the corner, Sullivan noticed something that made him back out immediately. A purple jacket, small and child-sized, with what looked like a butterfly patch on the sleeve. Sullivan stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his toolbox. His hands shook so badly he had to dial 911 twice before getting the number right. When the dispatcher answered, his voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "I found something. You need to send police to 247 Oak Street right now. I think I found where that little girl was kept, the one who went missing 20 years ago." Within 15 minutes, Oak Street was blocked by police vehicles, their lights painting the grey afternoon in alternating blue and red. Within 30 minutes, Detective Lisa Martinez arrived at the scene, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had inherited Emily Carter's cold case file when she joined the Brookfield Police Department 5 years earlier. She'd read it cover to cover multiple times, memorizing details, keeping it active when others suggested it should be archived. The forensic team arrived with lights, cameras, and evidence collection equipment. They documented everything methodically, photographing the room from every angle, measuring dimensions, cataloging each item with precision. The purple jacket was carefully collected and sealed in an evidence bag. Children's clothing was gathered, jeans, shirts, underwear, socks, all sized for a child of approximately 9 or 10 years old. The books were examined: a Nancy Drew mystery, a picture book about horses, a chapter book about pirates, the same book Sarah Carter had mentioned her daughter reading the morning she disappeared. The drawings were heartbreaking in their progression. Early ones showed artistic talent and hope, colorful depictions of sunny days, happy families, a girl playing with a dog. Middle drawings became darker but still maintained some color. Final drawings were done in dark pencil, showing only a small figure curled in a corner, tears streaming down the face, the word "Mama" written repeatedly across the top. Behind a loose brick low in one wall, forensic technicians discovered a metal lockbox covered in rust and cobwebs. Inside were Polaroid photographs that made seasoned investigators turn away in horror and grief. The images showed Emily Carter at various stages, some from shortly after her disappearance showing her looking confused and frightened, later photographs showing her thin and ill, her eyes hollow and desperate. Also in the lockbox were handwritten journals, 3 spiral notebooks filled with Robert Henley's distinctive script. The entries detailed his obsession with Emily, which he described as protecting and saving her. His delusional justifications painted a picture of a fractured mind, convinced it was doing something noble. Detective Martinez read portions of the journal with growing nausea and fury. Henley had documented how he'd intercepted Emily on April 12, 2003, telling her there had been an accident involving her mother and he would drive her to the hospital. A 9-year-old child, trusting and frightened for her parent, had gotten into his car without question. He'd brought her to this hidden room he'd constructed months earlier, believing in his twisted mind that he was protecting her. The journal entries chronicled the months of Emily's captivity. He described her initial fear and crying, her eventual resigned silence, her desperate attempts to maintain hope through drawing. He wrote about her illness developing in late autumn, about his increasing panic as she grew sicker, but his refusal to seek medical help because it would expose what he'd done. The final entries, dated mid-November 2003, described her death from what appeared to be pneumonia exacerbated by the cold, damp conditions. Forensic teams carefully excavated the sealed compartment on October 12th. Behind a false wall constructed with concrete blocks, they found the skeletal remains of a child wrapped in deteriorating blankets, positioned carefully as if sleeping. Dental records and DNA analysis confirmed what everyone already knew. After 20 years, Emily Carter had finally been found. She had been less than 3 blocks from her parents' home the entire time. The revelation sent shockwaves through Brookfield that were somehow worse than the original disappearance. Robert Henley had lived at 247 Oak Street for 43 years. He'd been a fixture in Brookfield, quiet, solitary, but seemingly harmless. He attended St. Michael's Church sporadically, kept his lawn meticulously maintained, and worked his postal route with unremarkable efficiency. Neighbors described him as reserved but polite, the kind of man who waved from his porch but rarely engaged in extended conversation. In the aftermath of Emily's disappearance, he had even participated in volunteer searches, walking through the woods with other concerned citizens, calling her name into the darkness while she lay imprisoned in his basement. Detective Martinez's investigation revealed a horrifying timeline. Traffic camera footage from April 12, 2003, recovered from archives and previously overlooked, captured Henley's vehicle turning onto Oak Street at 4:03 p.m. The forensic evidence told the rest of the story. Emily had been held in that crawl space for approximately 7 months. The progression of her drawings, the dates in Henley's journal, and forensic analysis of the scene all pointed to her death occurring in November 2003. Henley had sealed her remains in a specially constructed compartment within the crawl space itself, a tomb within a tomb. He had continued living in the house above for another 19 years and 11 months, going to work, church services, and neighborhood meetings while keeping this monstrous secret. Sarah and David Carter received the news in Detective Martinez's office, sitting in the same chairs where they had first reported their daughter missing 2 decades earlier. Sarah collapsed when shown the purple jacket, touching the butterfly patch with trembling fingers. "She never took this off," she whispered. "It was her favorite." The grief they experienced was different from the painful hope they had carried for 20 years. This was final, absolute, and somehow more terrible for the proximity. Emily had been so close, yet impossibly far, the entire time. The funeral was held on a grey November morning. Hundreds attended, many who had searched for her as children now bringing their own sons and daughters. They buried her beside her grandparents in Brookfield Cemetery beneath an oak tree. Her headstone bore her dates, 1994 to 2003, and a simple inscription, "Forever 9, forever loved, forever home." In the months that followed, Brookfield struggled to process the revelation. Henley's house was demolished, the lot remaining empty until it was eventually transformed into a memorial garden with purple flowers planted in Emily's honor and a plaque telling her story. Lincoln Park was redesigned and renamed Emily Carter Memorial Park, transforming from a place of loss into a space dedicated to her memory and to the protection of all children. Detective Crawford, now 73 years old, visited Sarah and David Carter after the funeral. He apologized for not finding Emily while she was alive. Sarah took his weathered hand in hers and told him what she had come to understand, that monsters are experts at disguise, that evil often wears an ordinary face, and that sometimes the darkness is closer than anyone can bear to imagine. The dark truth revealed after 20 years was this: Emily Carter had been stolen, not by a stranger from some distant place, but by a neighbor who lived 3 blocks away, a man whose madness was hidden behind decades of apparent normalcy. She had called out for her parents through walls that muffled her voice, had drawn pictures of the home she could almost remember, had waited for rescue that came too late. Her story became a reminder that vigilance is not paranoia, that trust must be tempered with awareness, and that the price of innocence is sometimes paid by those who deserve it least. Today, Emily Carter's case stands as a testament to persistence, to parents who never stopped searching, to investigators who refused to close the file, to a community that held her memory when hope seemed impossible. She remains forever 9, forever in that purple jacket with the butterfly patch, forever the little girl who wanted to be a veterinarian and collected smooth stones from the creek. She was taken by darkness, but reclaimed by truth. And though her life was stolen, her story endures as both warning and memorial. In the end, Emily Carter came home, not as her parents had prayed, but with a finality that allowed them to finally say goodbye. The house on Oak Street is gone, replaced by flowers that bloom purple each spring, and in that transformation lies a quiet truth, that even from the deepest darkness, something beautiful can grow, not as compensation for what was lost, but as proof that love endures beyond death, beyond time, beyond the reach of those who seek to destroy it.